Hello and welcome to another episode of Israel Update. I'm Gadi Taub in the Golan Heights, and Mike Doran, as you see, is not in Washington at all. Mike has been here for a week talking to people inside and outside government. And Mike, so what are your impressions about what has changed since October 7th?
Yeah, you know, I haven't been here since October 7th, so I've been, as you know, following it closely, but there's nothing like coming and actually talking to people. I was down at the Gaza periphery. I went to Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and now we're here in the Golan Heights with a fly.
And getting here was a little tricky because the GPSs don't work.
Yeah,
the army is scrambling them apparently.
The army is letting the war get in the way of my easy access to information. No, I think the biggest thing that I feel is actually what we've been talking about, what you've been saying in the podcast, which is that there's been a unity of the people behind the goals of the war, but the political echelon remains fragmented, and there's a strong sense among people that the political echelon, and to a certain extent, I think the military as well. This is the one thing. I didn't finish my thought, but one of the big things that struck me is the criticisms of the military that you're hearing, even at this moment when people are appreciative of the military and appreciative of the sacrifice. I mean, night before last was a very bad night here because they lost so many soldiers in Gaza. But the people are appreciative of it, and they recognize that they need the military and that only the military can protect them. At the same time, there's a distrust of the military that I have never seen before. So there's a tremendous unease about what's going on here.
I think you can divide it between the soldiers and the upper command, because there's tremendous appreciation of the spirit of sacrifice, and you have all these videos on social media are reservists saying, "Don't bring us home until this job is done. We want to finish this job," while the upper echelons are, I would say, the pre-October 7 command. And don't forget that although in the political arena everybody is trying to blame Bibi or else, I don't know, from the right, their politicians, because some of these politicians were the military before, the discourse in the media doesn't quite capture what you apparently sensed, is that these people are responsible for the October 7 Mechdal. Now, for not the first time, explain Mechdal to our English-speaking audience.
The simple translation of Mechdal is screw up, but what it actually means is an inattention to something. What's the word I'm looking for in English?
Default?
No. When you neglect to do something you should have done that has terrible consequences.
And
I'm missing a word here, but
we get the gist, and this is, and when you look at the details of this Mechdal, they are unbelievable. I mean, military people from around the world keep calling us, and journalists in the United States keep calling us and saying, "How the hell could this happen?" And the joke is, I mean, it's a terrible joke, but and maybe it has an origin. You know, they breached the fence. And so apparently someone in the army said, well, the fence is not built for 100 terrorists. It's built for a small unit. The tunnels are for big commandos. So they broke the rules. The fence was for something else. But I remember one of your first explanations. I recall you saying this. I don't remember on what media. You explain how the different weapons they use, the different tactics, all low tech, could outsmart this big.
They understood the decision making of the Israelis. They understood the systems and the decision, the technical systems, the human systems, the whole process of decision making, and they overwhelmed it and confused it. That's really clear. I went down to the Gaza periphery, went to Kfar Aza, It became even clearer to me when I was down there, some little things that I had not latched onto. For example, the police station in Sderot, they understood the terrorists that in Sderot, the only element that was going to be a rapid response force in that arena was the police. So they went right to the police station, thereby freeing up everyone else around to do whatever other terrorist units to go carry out their missions unimpeded.
And then there is also a great fog over what happened to the chain of command, not just in the Gaza Chativa, the Gaza division, but also above that, because the chiefs had a conference call, and they discussed the intelligence that they did have, and they thought there might be a breach of defense. And why didn't they raise the readiness of the troops, alert the troops around the Gaza perimeter to what is going on? And why didn't they wake up the Minister of Defense and the Prime Minister? And the Prime Minister, we know, only learned about this at 6:29 in the morning as it was progressing.
Right.
And then why did the IDF...
I've heard this now. Of course, it was reported in the media, but I've heard this from unimpeachable sources.
Yeah,
that 629 is the first that Netanyahu and Gallant knew of any of this, and the heads of the defense establishment had met and made decisions that were actually inadequate decisions beforehand.
And they said, we'll reconvene in the morning and consider this again. And then there is also the question why it took the IDF so long to respond after the breach began, because there's a lot of complaints from people who said, where is the IDF? And this is...
I was told some things about that I don't think I can talk about yet. We'll have to wait. People told me things in confidence that were shocking and interesting. There's going to be a huge reckoning when the time comes with the entire upper echelon, and I think everyone, left, right, understand, and everyone who's in power understands this.
And as this is going on, the army set up a commission of inquiry of its own without telling the politicians, inviting former ministers of defense, former heads of army intelligence to investigate themselves. And there is a huge uproar this whole week about this because it stunk to high heaven.
I have talked to a lot of people about that. People who are against it strongly, people who are for it, and so on. And the interpretation that made the most sense to me that I heard is that Herzl Halevi, the chief of staff, he did this in pure innocence. That it was really from a point of view of from an operational point of view, we have to draw certain interim conclusions in order to make sure we don't make the same mistakes. But someone very sophisticated told me that he believes, and this made sense to me, that Herzl Halevi is doing this from sound operational motives, but it is being used by a lot of different elements to try to begin whitewashing the decision makers.
Yeah, what I think raised suspicion among the Israeli public was, first of all, the people that he chose for that. There is Zevi Farkash, who was the head of intelligence, who was probably one of the most failed head of intelligence we ever had. He dismissed the Libyan nuclear project and also the Syrian nuclear project. And there was a minister in that government back then, in the Olmert days. It was Yuval Steinitz, who is a doctor of philosophy, and this head of intelligence gave him a lecture, and he said, you are probably very proficient at philosophy, but I am a professional intelligence officer, and I'm telling you, there is no such project. The project in Syria is insignificant. And Yuval Steinitz said,
I never heard that story.
And it doesn't end here, because
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but one of the things that needs to happen is we should put together a little handbook of sentences that heads of intelligence should never say, no matter what they think, because there's about 20 of them that have come out.
We'll go back to Khalifa in a minute. In a minute, but Yuval Steinitz, who is a philosopher, said, well, sir, I am a philosopher, and in philosophy we teach to doubt what we are hearing. and Yuval Steinitz was right. And that's not all. Ze'evi Farkash, who is a aluf, is a general in the IDF, a retired general, supported the refuseniks in the struggle over reform.
Yeah.
And of course, what happened in the struggle over reform, there was this movement of refuseniks, which we learned, by the way, was a sham, because the minute there is a war, everybody came. Nobody said, no, I'm not participating. You know, they all threatened not to come in case of a war, but they all did. But these brass, the retired brass, encourage this.
You know,
and people think that, and that is certainly something a commission of inquiry should be looking at. They think that our enemies saw our weakness, because they said it. We have them on tape saying this, saying the IDF is collapsing. Now is the time. I heard a phrase here that I have never heard before. You've probably heard it a million times. That seems to be, I've heard it 5 times, so everyone is saying it. But before I had many times heard the Tzava sheyesh lamedina, this is an army that has a state. Yeah.
I now hear that this is an air force that has an army that has a state. Have you heard that before?
No, I know.
Oh, you haven't. I've heard it 5 times. Yeah, this is that the Air Force is really the premier element of the IDF, and that it has a way of imposing its views on the rest of the military. And there was that famous clip that went around. You actually sent it to me, of the commander of the land forces in the south talking to the chiefs of the IDF, and he's saying, actually, this is before October 7th, and he's saying, we in the Shirion, we're ready to fight. We want to fight. You should put us into the fight, because friction with from the good Clausewitzian term, friction with the enemy is one of the ways that you learn about the enemy, and so we should be in this, but you will not put us in. And they're all sitting there laughing at him while he's talking. And turns out he was right.
Yeah, it turned. And we'll have a quote from Khalifa in just a minute. אז עכשיו אנחנו צריכים לעשות הפסקה בשביל לעשות את זה, להתחיל עוד פעם. יפה מאוד, נכון?
Well, it's good to be in person, isn't it?
כן, כן.
Because we can actually, it's so much better than...
I need to remember. So, Khalifa, the current chief of intelligence,
military intelligence,
who is in Israel, he is also the national intelligence chief. So he gets everything from Mossad, Shabak, and he's supposed to synthesize that. And one of the quotes that became now famous is that he sat with Netanyahu, and remember, these are the days of the struggle over the reform, and the army is very cocky, and it's a half rebellion against Netanyahu, and it's a half coup, so they're not informed, and also dismissing him. And he said in one quote, he said, the prime minister said he doesn't agree with me, and I'm sorry. I said, Prime Minister, you just have an opinion, but my opinion is based on 1,000 experts of intelligence, so it should be respected.
There's another clip
that we saw from
where INSS, where he's sitting in Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
We're talking about the same thing?
I think I do.
He's in INSS, and he's I can't remember.
Which is an American think tank, an American-sponsored think tank? Is that
well, it's an Israeli think tank, maybe lots of American money behind it. But,
democratic.
But it's left-leaning and very, but establishmentarian, left-leaning, with lots of ties to the United States. And he's saying that a head of intelligence, someone in my position should never be sure of anything. I always have to doubt the concepcia, with a clear reference to 1973. This is before October 7th, and he's like, but however, I can say that we're going to have 7 years of, what was it,
5 years from Shomer Chomot.
Yeah, 5 years of quiet. We're going to have it.
Yeah, so understandably, people are outraged at how confident the army was, and one of the questions people are asking is, what was the conceptia? In Yom Kippur, we know what happened. In 73, this is 6 years after 67. In 67, we won a lightning victory. The army has never been so arrogant as it was after 67. The reigning conception was that the Arabs would never dare to test us again.
Just for our viewers, that I think we should explain that concepcia implies not just it automatically implies groupthink, and the groupthink conception was.
So the Israeli army set up Ipcha Mistabra. They have one unit in the intelligence who should, after there is groupthink, say, let's say the opposite, what then? And now let's try to arrange all the information according to a different conceptia. And this doesn't work, of course.
It doesn't
because
work.
It's part of the groupthink.
Right, no, it doesn't
and people
work.
are saying, you are Ipcha Mistabra. You are the unlikely interpretation of the facts, and they keep dismissing it.
It doesn't work. I saw that when I worked in the White House. They called it Red Cell, I think, or Red Team. I forget. I used to read the products that would come out of the intelligence community, and the problem is, if you're working on Red Team stuff, you still want to get ahead in your career, like as long as, so you're not going to, if you actually insist and improve that the conception that the highest elements in the country are in love of is wrong, even if you're right, you'll never be forgiven for that. Especially if you're right, you'll never be forgiven.
And this is what happened to Yitzhak Brik, who is a former general of the IDF, and who has been. I've had suggestions to interview Brik many times, and I didn't because people are saying Brik is crazy, and he kept saying the IDF is not ready for.
Well, often this is I often find people who are the most interesting are crazy. So, because it takes certain personality traits to go against something that everyone believes.
At least great stubbornness. And now he's a hero of the media because he kept saying that we are not getting ready for the right thing. And part of the conceptia, there are many layers to the conceptia, but part of it is that the army kept assuming that regular armor to armor, infantry to infantry wars were obsolete, and that we're now engaged only in Air Force, cyber, this solaric, is that the word? Solaric wall that we built underground.
I looked this word up, and
slurry.
And it's actually based on an English word which I had never heard, and
really?
I've already forgotten it. Yeah. I looked at all that because what do you say? Solari? Is that what you say?
You say slurry.
Slurry.
But it is a wall.
It's actually an English word that made its way into Hebrew, and I've already forgotten it.
And it's an underground. It's the extension of the wall.
It's a smart fence that has
underground, so that it's basically impossible to go under. Impossible as
you can go through it apparently in about 5 minutes when you want to.
Yeah, because the upper fence.
If you just bring a bulldozer, you can go right through it.
But the upper fence is just built for small units. It's not built for big units. The big units should go underground. That was the concept.
How come they didn't play according to the rules?
Yeah, So there's anger at the upper echelons of the army, and also, these people. I'm not sure people get it outside Israel, but they're also blamed for their progressive worldview, because the army prides itself on being moral.
I heard again, I don't want to quote, but from a couple of very well-placed people who complained about the priorities of the military before October 7th being focused on reforming the world, the society, rather
and climate change,
and climate change, transgenderism, all the progressive agenda. The senior leaders were spending as much time on that as they were on, or even more time on that than they were on actually getting ready to fight a war against Hamas.
And it's going on as the war is going on. It's still going on because General Finkelman is sending his troops to erase.
This is the southern commander.
Sending his troops in Gaza to erase their triumphant graffiti on walls.
It's hard. I have more sympathy for him than you do on this, because the Israelis. It is also true. If I can now contradict everything I've been saying, it is also true that the Israelis are. Live in a world that is significantly different than Western Europe. And when they talk freely and openly about what they want to do and what they're thinking, their language grates on the West, on Western ears. And the army realizes it has to explain itself to a much wider audience. And it wants to ingrain in the soldiers a sense of how to protect their reputation abroad. I think that's a legitimate activity. I don't know what the answer is. But there's the disconnect between the Israeli discourse and the Western European and American discourse is significant.
And the way everything is easily used against us.
Very easily used, but Israelis are not aware that they'll be saying something that I think is perfectly acceptable if understood within the context of what they're talking about, but they'll say it in such a way that will be easily used by their detractors.
Yeah, and remember, when you're talking about an army, the spirit in the army is not the spirit of moral grandstanding. You need to have, as they call it, in the Air Force. In the Air Force, if I had a friend who was in pilots training, who was assigned to Tovala. I think he.
Louisville?
Yeah. So you're not a combat pilot, but you.
Okay.
You steer a Hercules.
Yeah.
You pilot a Hercules, and the reasons his commanders put him there is they said, "En lecha retzach ba'einayim." You don't have murder in your eyes. So apparently, having murder in your eyes is supposed to be what you need to be a combat pilot.
It's funny when I thought this was interesting when when we were going toward war in the United States in 2003. A friend of mine who was in the military called me up, and he said, "This is serious. We're going to war." And I said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Oh, because the senior commanders have moved out all of the peacetime commanders, and they've put the killers in charge."
Yeah.
And he gave me examples, and I thought that was kind of interesting that there was a sense. I don't know if that still exists in the American military. It probably does, of who's a
peacetime commander and who is a retzach ba'einayim.
Yeah.
But if you look at the army spirit, this is what you need. And I'll quote for the nth time my friend the satirist who said that not only is the IDF the most moral army in the world, it's also the only one in the competition. It's armies don't compete at being moral. They should compete at winning. And we have commanders who compete at being moral. And this is also and when we talk about the conception Yeah. So and we should talk about this in greater detail. I'm going to write a piece about this for Tablet. But there are many.
A piece about what?
About the concept. What is the concept?
Actually, this is something that we need to do. Actually, I was thinking that as well. That from this trip, that everyone is using the term here.
But you asked them what is the concept?
But nobody has actually sat down and tried to spell it out from top to bottom. It's really a worthwhile effort.
I think it's like a Russian babushka.
Yeah.
There's and when you peel it, so you have the I don't know which it should be the inside doll and which should be the outside doll, but at the end of this chain you have the idea that Obama brought to this region, saying, look, at the end, it's a very American thought. In the
integrating everything.
Not just that, also, in the end, all sides to a conflict, they all want their children to grow up peacefully, to have food on the table and a proper education, good medical.
We're all underneath it. We're all the same.
Yes. And what we learned here is that at least the Palestinian leadership is prepared to take any amount of casualties to fulfill its fanatical, ideological Nazi ideology, which means that killing Jews is the most important thing.
I remember when the scales fell from my eyes on this question, because when I was younger, in the 1990s, I had the Obama conception, or partially had the Obama conception, and it was during the Second Intifada. I met with a guy who was personally very well acquainted with Yasser Arafat, and the question at the time was, what was Arafat behind the Second Intifada? Did he initiate it, or did it explode and then he just went along with it? And at the time, I believed the latter. I don't know the answer to the question still, but for me, it's an open question. I have no idea. But at the time, I believed the latter, and I put it to this guy who's anti-Israeli, very familiar with Arafat, and I said, I expected to get confirmation from him. And I said, well, isn't it true? I said, one of the reasons that I believed that Arafat was not behind it was that the West Bank economy was doing so well at the time, and in cooperation with the Israelis. And he said, That's not an argument. That's not a valid argument. And I said, why? And he said, Arafat wouldn't spend 2 seconds thinking about that. And he actually knew Arafat, so that was really striking to me. That's when my whole view of things started to change.
We're almost out of time, and I want
to leave you with one thing. So go ahead and say what you want to say.
And what I want to say, I just want to put this on the table because we should discuss it in greater detail, because it goes back to what you started with, saying that there's frustration with the army, or at least with the upper echelons. Now soldiers are coming back from reserve. I just did an interview for my Hebrew podcast with an officer in the infantry, and this young woman who is a captain, and she said she represents the Mahal HaMiluimnikim, the protest tent that the reservists have set up in front of the Prime Minister's office. So this is not the left-wing protest with the hostages aimed to topple the government. These soldiers coming back from Gaza saying, your strategy is not going to lead us to victory, and we demand victory. And this is going to be a big thing, because you're a scholar of Yom Kippur, and as you know, after Yom Kippur they set up a commission of inquiry, and the commission of inquiry blamed the army but spared the politicians. And this one guy, Moti Ashkenazi, began the reservist protest, and it ended up toppling a government. So this is a very big thing. We have now the greatest number of reservists in active duty ever in the history of Israel.
Yeah, and they're going to come back home. They're going to come, and they have all their families. That's my big takeaway, that the spirit of that tent is the spirit of the country, I think. That is going to be the defining attitude of the next election when it comes. Amit Segal, one of my favorite journalists here, I believe he said that it's like a tectonic shift, and tectonic shifts produce mountains. The politician who is set to benefit the most from the sentiment you're talking about is actually not Netanyahu and none of the people on the right, but Gantz, because Gantz embodies that spirit of unity. You're going to disagree with me on this?
For now, Gantz embodies it, but Gantz supports a two-state solution.
Yeah,
and the minute this is going to be on the table, it's going to come back and bite him.
It's a mountain. It's a mountain of sand. It's going to crumble, but it's going to have. The real challenge for the political right is to try to come up with a leader who can embody that unity in the same way that Gantz can, and I don't see who that can be at this point.
I don't either, but I'll leave you with a Gantz quote. We'll finish with that because we're out of time, which is also going to come back and bite him. Gantz prided himself on risking more Israeli soldiers in order to have less civilian casualties on the other side. And people were outraged when he said this. We're not sending our sons and daughters to the army in order to protect the civilians of the other side. We're sending them to protect our civilians. We are almost out of time, so Mike, your last word.
The last word is that another thing that was repeated to me over and over and over again is that they're developed in the military a notion that soldiers dying is unacceptable, but some level of civilian death is acceptable. We're talking about all the rockets being fired from Gaza and the refusal on civilians,
our civilians,
on Israeli civilians, and the refusal of the IDF to take the war to the enemy and fight it on the enemy's ground, and allowing civilians in Israel to die. This is something that's really I never heard people talk like this before, and it's really on their minds now.
And this is part of a larger conception that we also should put an asterisk and discuss again, is the defensive conception. The army has been for a while, and you pinpointed where it started, but we're not going to tell our viewers now about your research on the Yom Kippur,
Why not?
on the on the war of attrition. We'll have to talk about it another time. Mike, It's a pleasure to have you here in the Golan Heights.
In the Golan Heights.
Right behind us. Thank you, and we'll see you again on the next episode of Israel Update.